Hi, everybody. Welcome again. And by the way, happy Halloween. We're going to get started with the program now. And this is all brand new territory for me. This is our first deep dive in interacting with the arts communities, and I couldn't be more excited about it. And to introduce the rest of the program, I want to turn the podium over to Ellen O. Ellen is the director of the interdisciplinary arts programs in Stanford's Office of the Vice President for the Arts, where they advocate for the arts, coordinate the arts ecosystem, and serve as a laboratory for interdisciplinary teams. We're thrilled to be working with Ellen and with her team. Ellen.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm just so happy to be here today to celebrate the Woods Institute's 20th anniversary and also the culmination of our inaugural Doerr Visiting Artist Program. As Chris said, I'm Ellen O., the Director of Interdisciplinary Arts Programs in the Office of the Vice President for the Arts. Stanford Arts is a constellation of institutions, departments, programs, and people all working to unleash the full potential of the arts on campus and in our communities. With the leadership of Deborah Cullinan, Stanford's Vice President for the Arts, we believe that art is essential and consequential, and it holds a unique power to inspire change. When art and science come together, the impact can be transformative. They can shape not only our knowledge, but our emotions and actions. Art has the ability to reach people in ways that science alone often cannot. A quality that's crucial in addressing urgent issues like climate change and sustainability. We're so grateful to the Doerr School, whose openness to partnering with us through this program shows a deep understanding of the power of interdisciplinary research and practice. This is an example of the kind of work that can happen only at Stanford, a place where we can integrate the unique methodology of the arts into a standard-setting school built for impact. We look forward to future collaborations that explore the intersection of art and environmental advocacy. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our collaborators, Mark and Mehr. Our inaugural Doerr visiting artist, Mark Baugh-Sasaki, is a San Francisco-based sculptor and installation artist who received his MFA from Stanford in 2017. Mark's work is a stunning exploration of humanity's relationship with nature, bridging the organic and the industrial to provoke thought and reflection. His practice sheds light on the complex interplay between natural and human-made environments, an essential perspective as we face the global climate challenges ahead. Mehr Kumar is a research ecologist in the Oceans Department at Hopkins Marine Station, and also an artist and an environmental advocate. She is interested in how the world records us as humans, how humans have influenced ecosystems, and how they might be restored. She applies scientific methods to art and artistic methods to science because she believes that knowing about something and knowing something are not always the same. Please join me in welcoming Mark and Mehr.
Thanks for being here. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about both the science context and our collaboration as a whole. Mark and I have been working on this together, as Ellen mentioned, for almost the last year, and we're really excited to share it with you, so thank you all for coming. As Ellen said, my name's Mehr, and I'm a marine ecologist. I'm an artist, and I'm an environmental justice advocate. I was actually an undergrad here in Earth Systems, and I stuck around to work at the beautiful Hopkins Marine Station, where I'm a researcher now. Over the last few years, I have been working on a Woods Institute funded project, and I would like to tell you a little bit about it. What do I press? Okay, so this is my study system. This is the Southern Ocean. Don't feel bad if you haven't heard it. Nobody taught me that the Southern Ocean was an ocean when I was younger. It is a newer ocean, but is nonetheless an extremely important one. The Southern Ocean, actually, we have it to thank of all of anthropogenic carbon emissions, so all of the carbon emissions that humans release into the atmosphere, the Southern Ocean absorbs almost 40% of that. So thank you for doing what you do. This ocean can influence global climate patterns. It also can impact what nutrients are available in the ocean in other regions around the planet, and also is home to the biggest animals that have ever lived on the planet, baleen whales. But in the 20th century, over the course of only 70 years, so just to give you context, that's about the lifespan of a blue whale, fewer than a dozen countries removed over 1 million whales from this system. And the quantity of whales that we remove from this system is about double the biomass of all wild animals on Earth today. So we've removed a lot of animals very rapidly in less than a human's lifespan. And when we did that, the entire system suffered. This is important because when we removed the whales, the Southern Ocean became limited in one of its really important nutrients, iron. So the Southern Ocean, while it's nutritious in a lot of ways, you can think of it as a little bit anemic. It's missing iron as a component. Iron in the ocean is pretty much entirely driven by wind from, like dust from continents. And the wind blows into the ocean, and that's how we get iron in our oceans. But you'll notice in the Southern Ocean, there's not a lot of continent. And what continent there is frozen pretty much year-round. So there's not a lot of iron dust and not a lot of iron availability. And so when we removed whales, whose poop, is 10 million times more concentrated in iron than seawater. We removed whales, we removed their iron-rich poop. We also removed that system's ability to have huge fertilized phytoplankton blooms, to sustain a really huge krill population, which is also the linchpin for the entire ecosystem. And the ecosystem that used to once be really thriving, over the course of only 70 years and one animal's removal, became a lot less productive. Now, when we disrupt an ecosystem, one of the first questions we ask is, how do we fix it? How do we go about rebuilding it? And how should we try and restore it? But in order to restore an ecosystem, we need to know what we're restoring it to. And that's where our research comes in. Over the last few years, I have been working with a really cool international team of scientists here at Stanford, also in France, also in Spain, and also now with Mark, to look at this 4-meter-long sediment core, which is a vertical sample of the ocean seabed. This comes from a region in the Southern Ocean where there was the large-scale removal of whales from this system. And sort of like tree rings, each layer of this sediment core gives us a window into the past and tells us, okay, at this time, what did this look like? Over the 4 meters, this core covers 1,000 years, so we can look back pretty far. And that also gives us a window into what things looked like before whaling. So using diatom microscopy, so looking at phytoplankton skeletons that are hundreds of years old, trying to do genetics on DNA fragments that are 1,000 years old, and looking at elemental analysis to search for things like iron, we are asking the question, what did the system look like before whaling? But also inherent to that question is, what did it look like before human involvement? As scientists, we spend a lot of time recording the natural world. But what I think is really special and exciting about this project is that this is a cool example of the natural world also recording us. And we have a lot to learn about ourselves by looking at the way the natural world records us. So while this research asks, sure, what did the system look like before human involvement? It also asks bigger questions, like what do we want it to look like and how can we restore it given that human involvement is inevitable in this system and we will always be there? In writing this grant, the Woods Institute asks, and I think very admirably, for a knowledge to action plan. So how are you as a scientist, if awarded this grant, how are you going to take what you have learned and move it into action? Scientists in this room will know that those pathways are not always very well defined. While we want action, we don't always know how to do it. And the pathways for that are really not clear. And I think that right now we can all agree action is really important, but action also requires thinking ahead. Science does a really good job of, we look at the past, what can we learn from what's already happened? We look at the present, what can we learn from what's going on right now? And we might project the future a little bit too, right? Like if we keep going this way, how far will we get? If we tweak it a little bit, how far will we get? But where I think science might need a little bit of help, maybe from art, is to imagine those futures. So I think equally important, a question is, what do we want this system to look like? What could it be? And what do we want for these places that we're trying to restore? And I think that that is the strength of art. People often ask me as an artist and a scientist how I want to bring those two things together, and specifically if I want to bring those two things in a science communication. I see science communication as part of my job description as a scientist myself. I see art as being able to bring in another aspect and to push us further. It's not merely a mode of communication. And so that's why this project, even though it is really interdisciplinary, even though we are using a lot of scientific methods that aren't often used together, I think we can push it a little bit further. And so I was really curious about pushing that interdisciplinarity and asking, can we use art as a research method? The same way we use genetics as a research method, the same way we use elemental analysis. And what if our research questions are approached using art and help us imagine a better and more restored ecosystem? So that's why a year and a half ago, when the Woods Institute came to our research team and asked, how do we help further the reach of the research that you're doing through the Woods Institute? I became really interested in the question, why not use art to bring us there and to stretch us a little bit further and to be imaginative? When I first posed this question as an art and science collaboration, not where the artist is merely inspired by science, but where the artist becomes a part of the science and the scientist becomes a part of the art. Art as a research method, research as an art method. I had no idea what it would become, and it would become all of this. Thank you all for coming. And I consider myself to be a pretty creative scientist, and I'm really lucky to have been connected with an extremely technical artist. And so over the course of the last year, we've been asking these questions together. What does it mean to restore an ecosystem? And how can we bring art to these questions to push us beyond communication? And yeah, it's been really cool to learn about Mark, and he's going to tell you a little bit about what he's done too.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Mehr, for that. So my name is Mark Baugh-Sasaki. I'm an interdisciplinary artist based in San Francisco. I actually grew up in San Francisco as well. So basically with my career, I've kind of always had this like really in-depth relationship with what we consider to be the natural world and thinking about how we change the world around us, our role within it, and how we can like imagine or work towards a better future. And so part of like when we're thinking about how science and art kind of collaborate, I wanted to bring in some work that kind of looks at like how I approach those kind of methodologies or my art methodologies. And so one of the ways is like thinking about art as like knowing, art as understanding, art as inquiry, and kind of thinking about these different ways. And so I've brought together a few works that we can kind of go through. I wanted to show you, like introduce you to my practice. And so first, this piece here is an older piece, but it's entitled Portrait of a Forest, where I was able to go through, hike all 4 different sides of Mount Tam, and gather every material that I could possibly find that was different. And so that rocks, water, plant material, but also trash, right? Those also define our space around us. And so, oops, sorry. I think that's gonna go back, yeah. And so I wanted that to be, you know, again, it's when we think about nature, when we think about our places that we think are unchanged by human actions, you know, there's still all of these things that kind of embedded within those spaces, but we still consider those to be, you know, natural. And so I think it's really wonderful to kind of highlight all of that. Also, in kind of working with site and location, right? This is a site that is a former gravel pit that was a gravel mine that has now been left to be derelict and is being reclaimed by the forest. And so one of these things in thinking about like imagining, right, thinking about what could be, this is using materials from the space. It's incorporating it with steel and bringing that into this to create kind of this visual imagination of kind of the forces flowing in and out of that space. And this is a space that it just kind of emerged from, and we're able to see it. And in thinking about understanding art as a way of understanding, as part of my MFA here, I spent about 2 years going through and doing research and at the site of the Tule Lake Segregation Center in far northern California, where my father was incarcerated. And so going through and thinking about how the landscape and geology is recorded both the physical sedimentation of the material, but also kind of the human emotion and human history and experience that also gets embedded within the land. And so, there's a variety of different complicated relationships in addition to, there's the indigenous histories, there's environmental displacement, there's socioeconomic issues of the area. And so all of these different things, in addition to the Japanese American experience, are kind of layered within that space to kind of create this unknowable landscape. And so this piece here was me working with the material, the dirt floor was dirt from Tule Lake to kind of create this container or vessel for human experience. And the geologic object in the center is this kind of thinking about how we have this human geology, oftentimes like gallstones or kidney stones, like human-created geology within our bodies, can also maybe be thinking about that in like a figurative or emotional way, like kind of create these emotional weights within our bodies. In 2017, 2018, I was a resident at the Recology Resident Artist Program, which is you get to basically go through all of San Francisco's waste stream and figure out your materials. And so one of the things that I was working on there, I was creating all these works, but I was really fascinated not only of like me creating work, but of the residue and waste of me creating work. And so as I would build work, I created myself a container that I could just take everything that I was working on that was leftover waste, sweep it up and toss it in the container. And it becomes my own like core, right, as we were talking. And so it becomes my own core of my time at the residency. So it's this way of recording. And so pandemic happened, and it really disrupted my practice. And so one of the things that I was really kind of, again, thinking about art as like a methodology, figuring out a way to create some regiment, some form of practice that I can do on a daily basis and record the same thing and see how the world changes, right? And to be able to kind of recenter myself. And so I was basically going to the ocean every day, and I would photograph the ocean, kind of varying times of the day, but always make sure to photograph a day. And so I spent a month just photographing, creating this kind of, it's called marking time. And so I created everything so that they're kind of off kilter, so everything doesn't feels off, but still present or still kind of recognizable. And to kind of create this, again, a way for myself to create a tool to understand my place in the landscape. And this is a self-portrait series. It's called Spatial Drawings, and they're carbon smoke drawings that are based off of my sculptural practice. But one of the things for me is that place and space has always defined who I am and kind of the landscape. And so thinking about how not only that we change the landscape, but how the landscape kind of defines us as well. And so these are all different. This is essentially like a self-portrait of me through space. And so what I will do is I'll gather materials, and based on my photographic knowledge and process, that I create these drawings. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with contact prints or have worked in a darkroom, but basically being able to lay the materials and use the smoke to expose those, to create those shapes. And so again, kind of for me, it's always been about gathering materials, understanding place and space, and for me, kind of thinking about how it defines who I am. And most recently, actually from our conversations, we were conceptualizing the artworks that we were working here, but at the same time, I had a solo show at the gallery that represents me, Riddle, where I was able to explore kind of like some of these tangential thoughts. And so when we're thinking about ecosystem restoration and thinking about what it means to restore an ecosystem, we began to talk about nature and like concepts of nature and how those are formed. and kind of reconsidering how those concepts of nature have actually kind of shaped the way we deal with and interact with the environment now. And so, in asking others to think about how to reconsider how their preconceptions of nature are formed, I was kind of asking myself that, and looking back at art history and thinking about photography and thinking about the role of painting in westward expansion, and like even the role of like Edward Muybridge, right, at Stanford, and kind of thinking about how all of that kind of really shaped the way in which we view the natural world. And so I spent a lot of time photographing the mountains and the Sierras, and I basically mined my archives and cut them all apart, deconstructing kind of my own preconceptions of the Sierras, and then rebuilding them back together again, and incorporating elements from that are like human marks in the landscape. So like in the bottom right corner of the blue image, there's a blast mark where we're thinking about there's the Pony Express Trail, and instead of just like building around things, we would just drill a hole and stick a piece of dynamite in there and blow it up, right? And so, but over time, it becomes part of this space and incorporated into it, and we no longer think of it as something, we don't look at it as something separate, right? It becomes part of that space. And so I think we're in that space now, and so I'm kind of exploring what that all means and kind of breaking apart my notions of nature. And then the final piece that I wanted to show you is that I am the artist for the Ocean Beach Climate Change Adaptation Project, which is run through the National Park System, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and San Francisco Rec and Park. And it's going to basically be a seawall and dune restoration and a pedestrian walkway where they close down the southern section of the Great Highway. And so my work was chosen particularly because when we're thinking about climate change, and we are always creating these, I think we're always thinking about these like monuments of like what will be or what will be, or sorry, what was or what will be. And so, it's always like, oh, the water's going to be this high or this is gone. And so for me, I was really interested in like the idea of adaptation and what adaptation means, which is, kind of like listening and changing. And so I created these listening stones, or these 11 listening stones that will be pointed out at the landscape, both at the ocean, at the land, and also kind of at the city, where you'll be able to use these objects from the landscape to listen to what the space is saying, and from there creating a space that reconsiders your actions and your role within the landscape, and hopefully to then take action and change. So in kind of thinking about that, right, I think one of the similarities that like Mehr and I really had was that like gloom and doom was like
we're not interested.
Not interested in gloom and doom, both in science and in art, right? But I think it's something that's uplifting, and we need to be excited about it, as opposed to always kind of like feeling like the world's ending.
Yeah, our collaboration has been so much of like just us chatting, and one of the first things that we came upon was, like if we want climate just futures, we need to be able to be optimistic about them, and science is not very good at that typically. And so it's been really fun to like talk through what it means to not have gloom and doom architecture in our lives, both in science and in art. And then Mark started introducing me to a lot of art, and I started introducing him to a lot of science, and we had a few pretty breakthrough moments, including this one.
Yeah, so this piece is called The Mending Project by
Yiling Wei.
There we go. And it was at the Young Museum, and we were able to kind of come to the museum, and actually on a happenstance, he was giving his artist talk.
And he pointed and he was like, we're gonna have to do that.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing right
It's
now.
like, we're gonna talk, we're gonna do that in front of everybody. But it was really wonderful because we were thinking about repair, and particularly that was in garments, but also in building relationships, where viewers were encouraged to come and talk with him, or other folks working at the station. And we began to think about what does that mean for repair and an ecosystem, right? And that really kind of started to bring up those questions of like, what does it mean to repair an ecosystem in this world that's been so drastically changed by humans, and how, right? And so, there's often like this, like the beauty and the poetics of repair, and is there a way to kind of incorporate that into kind of the next stage of this?
Yeah, is there any point in trying to hide the human hand in the concept of repair? It's really cool when you see these pieces. The purpose is to be able to see the kind of repair, and we looked at that and we were like, oh, like this must be how this works for ecosystems. And this is around, in the same conversation, Mark had just introduced me to the idea that there are actual artists that work on riverbed restorations as like for their careers. And I had never been introduced to the concept of ecosystem repair and rebuilding as an art form, but it made a lot of sense, and that's the starting point of where we went forward.
And then another one that we really connected on as we were kind of talking about artists, especially artists for me that were kind of like more seminal for me when I was younger and kind of getting started as an artist, was David Nash. And this piece here, for both of us, is always like, this was the piece that was really my core. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
And she was like, that's awesome.
So
We would
cool.
never be able to do that in science, but it's
We wouldn't be
great.
allowed to, but it's really cool.
And so the piece, is taking sod from kind of the forest and bringing it into this very manicured garden, and likewise taking the manicured lawn to the forest, and how they both kind of change and adapt over time. And so it's just a really...
Yeah, this was mind-blowing for me because I cannot imagine, as a scientist, anyone allowing me to take one environment and put it in another. But we do it all the time. We do it all the time, and we don't do it in a way that's sanctioned like this, and we also don't think about it in this way, right? We're not thinking about what is the purpose of exchanging landscapes. We're usually like, if we put this species here and this species here, maybe it will do something. And so it was really cool and like genuinely mind-blowing for me to see it used not just as a like productive mechanism, but as an artful mechanism.
And so going through our collaborations, one of the things that I was interested in doing was kind of doing these collaborative double exposure photographs where we were able to, essentially, I was like, have you ever shot film? And you were like,
The answer's
nope.
no.
Have you ever seen film? And so, it was really wonderful because it's a material and a process that is not used a lot anymore. And it has properties that I think are really exciting, and particularly one is being able to create a system and a methodology that leaves room for chance. And so we're thinking about like how our preconceptions of nature are formed. We're then going to a space that are either important to us, one of us, and we're introducing it to the other, and photographing basically using the photographs as a way of recording our kind of preconceptions of that space. And we can basically take a double exposure, which is one person take the image, second person takes the image over that image, and then creating a singular image. And in doing so, we ended up creating these like hybrid images that are both like a construction of both of our perceptions of place, of a place. When we say chance, there's also room for error. And in our first two sites, right, we basically shot a bunch of rolls of film, and due to technical error on the camera side, not ours, camera side,
Couldn't be.
we got nothing, zero.
We took a whole roll of film at Jasper Ridge because there is a core at Jasper Ridge. We were really excited about that. We walked around with Kim, and we basically like went on a walk, and Mark would take a photo, and then I would take a photo, and we went back and forth like that. We were so excited.
Yes,
And there was
so
nothing
excited.
on the film.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that's really wonderful. And you were talking about how like there's the failure in science, right? Like everything you do doesn't always work. And so I think that's something, it's like proposing, what will work. And so anyway, this is, we decided to do a second roll, and we were able to get it to work, which was great. And so we basically created the installation that's on the window graphic there, which is basically thinking about our two perceptions of place, creating our own geology, and building our own core that goes up the side of the building. And so these are images that we've recreated down at Hopkins and Asilomar.
Yeah, it was important for us to create work that bridged a place that's really far away, like the Southern Ocean, also with the place that we are in. the San Francisco Bay and in Monterey.
And lastly, most of y'all have seen the cores, hopefully, outside. And so these, again, thinking about creating tools for knowing and understanding, as well as kind of creating like an artwork. This piece we were thinking about, I was very just fascinated by the idea of like sedimentation. The idea of iron as a limiting nutrient was really exciting to me. And then began to play with materials. And one of the things that we were able to do as we were kind of playing with materials, we had krill oil and sand and everything I began to think about what was exciting and what motions were, for me, was exciting. And it was like, oh, that was really, we saw the iron move, and it was like, that's the thing. How can we like explore that and expand upon that? And so we were able to kind of create these, and they both kind of think about like how the iron kind of settles through the water column, but also it is a way of recording our human interaction with the piece. And so as you interact with the artwork, it changes over time, it oxidizes, and we found that like through the tests that the more you agitate it, the more it oxidizes, and so you'll be able to, over time, over the life of the piece, as the piece oxidizes, and you'll be able to tell which ones people interacted with the most, and kind of thinking about that as like a symbol for like our interaction within the larger landscape and environment.
Amazing. All right, everybody get out your phones. This is your chance. Okay, so before we wrap up, I wanted to share, Mark and I, you've seen a physical manifestation of our collaboration, right? We have these pieces, we have double exposure film photography, we have these beautiful cores that Mark built. You're also witnessing our collaboration right now. Literally 99% of it was us chatting like this. But another form of our collaboration that I really wanted to make sure we shared is it also exists in the form of a resource. So like over the course of the last year, the number of things Mark and I have sent to each other is nuts. And I went through all of our texts and all of our emails, and I took every link of science that I've sent to him, every art piece he's sent to me, everything that we both together were like, that's cool, the things that we wanted to point and look at and be like, let's show people this. And so we made the arts team at Stanford, which I cannot believe they did this, made this amazing virtual sediment core for us. And so the idea is that there aren't like 3 or 4 resources that are important for you to look at, but the process of going through all these things is what's important and is what we did. So we want you to be able to do that too. And to help us come talk about art and science together, we have art historian Kim Beil, who also has been a huge collaborator on this work and is also a docent at Jasper Ridge and took us out there for the first time. And she's going to come moderate this panel so we can chat more about art and science. Thanks for hearing us out, guys.
Thank you so much, Mehr and Mark, and everyone for having us here today. I think what is enormously evident is the amount of time and bravery that the two of you have shared in sharing of your own creative practice, sharing that with us today, and also working interdisciplinarily, which is one of the great strengths of some of the people in this room. But it remains difficult. And so I think of you two as an inspiration, and in this whole panel, indeed. So this panel is bringing together people who do research in multiple ways, as we've seen in the arts, like Mark. I've combined your names now, like Mark and Mehr. And they're working across multiple disciplines, like Rob Jackson, who's a climate scientist and also a poet and writer and photographer who has a new book out this year, which... and Hideo Mabuchi, who is a physicist, a potter, and a textile artist. So I want to turn to the far end of our panel to start first with Rob and Hideo to talk about what's useful for both of you as both scientists and artists about having these different ways of knowing at your disposal. And maybe we'll start with Hideo.
Okay. Yeah, when I think about that distinction between a kind of a scientific way of knowing or an artistic way of knowing, I'm thinking as a physical scientist, right? So that's kind of an extreme sort of science. And then as an artist, I really think of myself more as just a maker. I work in traditional craft, so ceramics and textiles. And from that perspective, I really feel like a scientific kind of understanding is a very transcendent one. It's kind of up on high. whereas the maker's way of knowing things is really much more immanent. It's kind of down in the stuff, right? Because as a physical scientist, right, the benchmark of understanding is always empirical adequacy, right? We want to understand things in a way that improves our ability to predict accurately what's going to happen in specific scenarios, and also empowers us to control in the sense of understanding how to intervene in processes to steer them in ways that we want. But in order to do that, we really have to adopt a very general approach where we tend to abstract away from the specifics of any given situation or instance and try to understand things in very general kinds of concepts. So it's abstract. As somebody working in ceramics, right, I often say that, yeah, you make a lot of stuff. You have to make a lot of stuff to learn ceramics. But those things that you make are maybe not so much the point. That rather what it is over a long period of time, you're many thousands of hours with your hands in the clay or stoking a fire. Really, it's about trying to develop a long-term relationship with the natural material. And so that kind of understanding is, I think, a very different one, right? Because you end up really thinking a lot about what feeling do you develop about how you want to do things? Like, what's a way to act responsibly and expressively within this very entangled sort of expressive field of natural materials, the way they come to you, the people that you know, the objects that you've seen, how your ceramics relates to sculpture, other things like that, how ceramics relates to science. And so in the end, I do feel that there are these two different perspectives of understanding even, say, a material like clay. But I, at the end of the day, like to come down to thinking that, well, really the poetry is in the correspondence between the two.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, thank you, Hideo. I guess I think of science and art as two separate pathways for hope. A photograph, a scientific study can be beautiful and elegant, and that's sufficient for its existence. A photograph or a scientific study can tell a story or affect change, and sometimes they do both. And I love cases where both of those things are done well. This is a marine theme today, and one of an ocean artist whose work I love is a woman named Courtney Madison. I have a piece of her art in my office. Courtney creates amazing coral reef sculptures. Just at an intricate scale, you look at them, and I'm a diver, you're on the reef, and then she builds these amazing sort of hurricane-like arms, and as you move out from the circle, from the center of the circle, the coral organisms get lighter and lighter and lighter until at the edge they're white to represent coral bleaching. And Courtney, in her own words, is not just an artist, she's an ocean advocate too. So her art, when you see it on a wall, conveys the story of coral bleaching in neglect in a way that a 60-minute PowerPoint presentation with slides is never going to affect everyone in the same way. So I guess I see, I've already said it, I see the link between art and this kind of science that I do and others here do as pathways to hope and a way to reach people.
So I wonder, since you are both practicing artists as well, how do you determine whether your question or your concern is something that will be answered better through your scientific practice or through your artistic practice?
I think I'll pick up very nicely from what Rob was just saying. I often feel like when I'm working as a scientist, that mode is sort of like, what you're supposed to be doing is kind of extending the edges of the map. And so you're supposed to be producing those kinds of results in a reproducible way so that other people can actually get to the same place, even if they use very different methods or follow a very different route to get there. And really, you're always supposed to be connecting the things that you're mapping back to kind of known trailheads so that people can really follow you. I think acting as an artist is kind of a different thing. It's more like you're trying to get lost. You're just following your nose or your ears or something like that, and just trying to get to a place that's going to feel sort of strangely familiar. And then when you get there, your response, what you make, the words or the images or the things that you make, they're really just kind of a response to the inspiration of this new place that you stumbled into. And so there is a question there of like, when you're exploring, what do you want to share? Do you want to share the knowledge or do you want to share the inspiration? And what's been interesting to find over time is that you don't necessarily just have to be doing one or the other. Like as you're out there making your map, you can allow yourself to wander off and get lost for a while, and maybe you find a new place and you want to start mapping again.
Rob?
I was fortunate this summer to spend a 5-week residency at Jurassic, which is just over the hill. And there were 9 artists, scientists, we lived together for 5 weeks and just had time to hike and create. And it was an amazing experience. When I first arrived, didn't love everyone's art that I saw, but that didn't matter. By the end of the 5 weeks together, I appreciated everyone's art for meaningful reasons. I understood what they were seeking, what they were trying to say, and why it spoke to them, and ultimately spoke to me as well. So I spend probably too much of my time in the science world and not enough time in the art world. I love poetry. It's always been my first love in many ways, and photography too. Building some sculpture out of Jurassic with my wife, Sally, who's here, a wonderful ceramic artist. So for me, it's not so much how do I decide how much time do I spend doing one or the other. I lately have been trying to decide systematically to spend more time in the art world.
So here we have the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with the art that's outside. I think everyone's spent at least a few minutes with it so far, but I'm wondering to get your quick take on how did that art speak to you both initially?
I walk up to I think they're great. I walked to one of them and just was watching other people turn the tube. And to me, I always just respond to it as a thing. And what really grabbed me was in watching, when you invert the tube, the first thing that catches your eye is there's this bubble, right? There's a bubble of air in there, which is really like frantically racing to get back up to the top of the tube. And once it's up there, it's just this tiny little bubble in a closed aquarium-like environment. And so to me, that really represents kind of the human in the ecosystem. It's like that last gasp of air. If you think about yourself in the tube, you're like, oh my God, that's all the air that I have. But kind of as this bubble is frantically racing up, you see the particulate sediment that's in there. It's just doing its thing. It's like very steadily making its way down, like more out of a sense of obligation than anxiety. But it also, when you watch it, the motion's very complex actually, if you watch the frontier of it going down. And it's a reminder that even very slow things can be really turbulent and chaotic and unpredictable. So I like those features of just what you see as you turn the thing.
And I love the playfulness of the exhibit. I love seeing people touch them. As I walked out there was a person sort of stroking the tube, almost like a dog, or something. I thought, that is a wonderful thing to see. And then I think art and science makes us ask questions about ourselves. As you flip that cylinder and this dark cloud falls through the sediment column or through the water, you ask questions like, is that pollution? Is this something natural? Is this something that we've made? Is it pollution? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? It makes you question what you're seeing and question our relationship to the oceans and the world around us. And I think that's a wonderful thing about the art that we saw.
Thank you both so much. And now I want to turn to Mehr and Mark and talk a little bit more about your collaboration. Since I know so much of this project, which is actually quite unique. We're seeing a result of that collaboration, but there's actually a year's worth of history here, which I think is also inspiring to think about your own relationships with people as a kind of artistic collaboration and even a scientific method. How do you get to know something from someone else? And how does that change you when you know that person? So I wonder if you could walk us through the steps of your collaboration. How did you start this? Did you have any fears along the way? How did you get through that?
You had some great ideas. I couldn't share them, but they were yours. Yeah.
I think for me, I have done residencies. I've been a resident at Jurassic. I've been a resident at Headland Center for the Arts. And so I think kind of basing this off of my experience in going to those places, it's often not about what the person is doing, but who the person is. And so it's more getting to know who you are as a person. So let's go for a hike. Let's go do some things that are just unrelated, tertiarily unrelated to what you do, what I do, take you out of your world, take me into your world, and find what is exciting to you, right? It wasn't just about here's my research. You're that's cool. But it was what excites you about science? What excites you about your either your research, but also maybe like who your friends are, right? And I met a lot of folks in the lab, you introduced me to them, and it was really wonderful to kind of meet other folks who surround you as well, because I think that's just part of who you are.
Yeah, I would say similarly, one of the first things we did was like so unrelated to either of these pieces or to either of the things we do, but we went fossil hunting.
Oh, yeah.
And that was such a memorable day for me. We went fossil hunting with Mark's family too, and so it was really fun to like do that with his family and understand who he is on that level too. But on one hand, we were like, all right, let's look for these things. Mark was like, what do you think we're gonna see there? I was like, I don't know, maybe fish, maybe crabs. I should know, but I don't. And most of the day was like just spent hammering stones, throwing them against the ground, looking for things with him and his daughter, and being like, that crab is cool. Or look at this pattern, I wonder what it is. Do you know what it is? No. And I think that was like the crux of what we did. It wasn't a lot of like telling each other what's going on. It was a lot of like, what do you think that's about? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, it was more about like asking questions, just curiosity, basically, both in like what we do. Yeah, it was just curiosity, I think, and play.
And it's been really fun having him in the lab too, because so rarely do you get a person who's not a scientist coming into a lab. And it was really fun to like watch Mark ask all of the other researchers in our lab questions that I would not have even thought to ask, like to what end for a lot of the work that we're doing, which I think is a really important question. So it's been really fun too.
I wonder if I can open that question up to the whole panel then. Do you see, what kind of value do you see in interdisciplinary collaboration, whether it's between art and science or even across disciplines within the sciences?
I think a lot these days about how if you really just stay within a certain professional discipline, and in the university, we really do have a tendency to get stuck in the profession of our discipline. There's certain understanding of like what's a well-posed question in your field, what's not a well-posed question, or what are the kinds of projects that you should pursue if you really want to impact what other people are doing. But then, for me, like working in ceramics, let's say, or doing physics, that started out as two things that are completely unrelated, and I actually don't ever really try to put those two things together. But it has been really interesting to experience how just over time, doing both of those very different kinds of things in an earnest way, it does really kind of change your focus of what you think is interesting to do. I think it's a really good kind of trick for kind of helping you escape out of the professional norms of your field and just ask bigger questions about what it is that's really important to do with your life.
I think it expands our thinking. And I mentioned Jurassic before. One of the first things I did when we arrived was to go dig clay from the riverbed. So 4 of the artists there, we all dug clay together. We processed that clay together. We didn't know each other, but as we worked through that clay over many days, we talked, we laughed. We discussed art and potential projects. I didn't cut the trees. I salvaged trees that were down for the base of the sculpture that we're working on. So I think one of the beauties of the science-art collaboration is the sort of the interaction and the joy that you heard Mark and Mehr express about learning from each other and spending time together. So I think for me that's one of the treasures of working in both fields.
Yeah, I think it's about also kind of expanding community as well. Like I think, everybody was saying, kind of you have these insular worlds, even in art, right? Art is also kind of very insular, and so I think it's just wonderful to be able to kind of expand and build community within both this institution, but also like as we continue to like around us, right? In our local communities, in our local communities.
Yeah, one of the first things we connected on to was I asked Mark how he showed so many different pieces, how he sees all of those things in his practice, and he was like, oh, it's all one practice. And for me, that's how I see science too, right? Like they all inform each other. And in our lab, we know that the whales that are specialists don't do very well in the Anthropocene, but the whales that are generalists do a lot better. And I think we've been taking a cool cue from that too in our collaboration.
Thank you all. So Mark and Mehr, I know in your talk earlier, you both said that you're not interested in doom and gloom or monuments to doom and gloom. and I've heard other members of this panel talk about sometimes how arguments can be dressed up as art. Rob, you specifically have spoken to that genre in the past, as it exists both in art and science, wherein someone sets out to make a point and then either makes art or makes science to simply prove that point. So I'm wondering if you could describe what's the opposite of that? What's the opposite of art or science that sets out to just prove a point?
Well, that's an interesting question. For me, these are ways that science and art differ in some ways. So, I mentioned Courtney's work. She's an ocean advocate. She's creating beautiful imagery to raise awareness for the oceans. And I think in science, one difference is in our lab, we talk about students, when you do a scientific study, we do a scientific study to find the answer, not to find the answer you want. And there is a difference. At Stanford, we're not an NGO. I don't work for Greenpeace, and I don't design my studies to prove a particular point. So there is a body of knowledge that it's our responsibility to help uncover. And if your work's any good, other people are going to go back and redo your work in a different setting or perhaps in the same setting, and you want them to get the same answer. So I think in science, just for me personally, have to be a little more careful about the advocacy, especially the things I'm passionate about. I want to affect change. I work in many ways to affect that change, but I need to make sure that the science that I do and that my lab does will stand on its own when someone else looks at it.
Hideo, would you like to address that also?
Sure, yeah. I mean, working in physics is an old science, right? So the frontiers are really far off. But I actually feel like in the kind of science that I do, the actual scientific method is something like, well, I guess something, and if that guess leads to something that would be really interesting or surprising, then scientific method is really about trying to convince myself that I'm right or I'm wrong. Right? So if that's the locus of what you think that you're doing as a scientist, really trying to convince yourself about your intuitions and improve your intuition, I think that helps to get away from this idea that you're doing something in order to argue a case. And I like this focus on questions. I think that's another interesting place to look for similarities and resonances between art and science. And in art, it struck me the other day that there are many cases in which I might ask myself a question, and if I'm acting as a scientist, I need to figure out how to make that question crisp and really systematically get to an answer. But there are a lot of times when, if I think about how I would do that, it sort of kills the interest in the question for me, like I'm not interested in it anymore. Because really, with more of an artist hat on, what I want from questions is I don't want the answers, I just want them to inspire me to do something new.
Yeah, I like that.
That has so much resonance with your collaboration too, that the idea was about stoking curiosity, really. So I see that as the unifying thread between all of these disciplines and your practices, that getting together with other people, discovering their excitement for things is something that can bring new knowledge, but also especially perhaps new questions to each of you. And I hope we'll all see that outside in your artwork as well. So for Mehr and Mark, I wonder where you see the practices of art and science as similar.
I think one that became really obvious is in the ways things fail. I think to Hideo's point about following your nose in art, I think we tend to do that a lot in science too, and follow the thread of what's interesting, follow the thing that's the next question. And also it seems that we can fail in similar ways, but that also gives you information either about process or about the thing that you're studying. And so, yeah, that was really cool to see that it's not just the outcome or the process that's similar, but it's also in the challenges that you appreciate in both art and science.
Yeah, I think there's also thinking about how we go about asking those questions, right? As art is also a way of inquiry into, inquiry into our curiosity, right? And I think science is curious, and trying to figure out the way our world works. Art is curious, and they're both devising different systems to look at those things. And one may feel, I think, what you're saying is one is very much more like, there's steps, right? And whereas art may feel like there aren't it's maybe a bit more of a wander, but there are also, I feel like there are also those steps that artists go through to kind of arrive at what they're interested in making, right? They're not just, I feel like I think we're both creating systems to explore, can explore similar questions or points, I guess.
Yeah, we're more similar than we are different. One of the first things we did too in SF is we went on this hike through this piece called The Philosopher's Way. And it was really funny to like watch me pick something up and be like, wow, look at this is so pretty. And watch Mark pick something up and be like, I know exactly what that is. And here's what it does. And here's why it's in this system. And so it was funny to like see the science come out of Mark and see some of the aesthetic like ideas come out of me. And yeah, we think very similarly. And I think that you'll find that to be the case for a lot of artists and scientists.
Great. So I have just one more question for the whole group. In your talk, you both mentioned that you sometimes see both science and the arts looking at a kind of idyllic past or imagining maybe a ruined future. We're often thinking about timelines when we're talking about climate change, and your work it exists on a very specific timeline. It's almost the academic year. It'll be here for maybe 9 months. We know we're supposed to go out and march and watch for some major changes, perhaps. So I wonder if we could all look forward a little bit. What do you see in the next year? What do you see in 2025? Maybe that's something in your art. Maybe it's something in the art outside on the terrace. But maybe it's something in the climate or in the world. We'll start at the other end and kind of work our way down. Hideo?
Just a brief thought about, one other thing I responded to in the work outside is that it's interesting to look into the tube and find that there are no sharp lines anywhere. Right? And yet, especially after you turn them, things are moving, but in a very diffuse way. And as I understand, the idea is that these pieces will change really a lot by the time that we get to next July. And so there is something interesting in that idea that things are going to change, but you don't see them as they change, just because the time scale is different than kind of what we're used to seeing. And it feels like that has some connection to the environment.
For me, oh my gosh, 2025? Our values and climate and environmental policies in this country are like Mark's tubes, right? 4 years support climate and green energy. The next 4 years pull out of the Paris Accord. The next 4 years, it's like whiplash. So I can't answer that question until a week from now.
A couple weeks
from now. Well, yeah, probably a couple weeks from now. I mean, what I will say, Kim was kind enough to mention my book, Into the Clear Blue Sky, and their work is predicated on a question: what does it mean to restore an ecosystem? Which is a question that's wonderful. And my book is predicated on a related question, which is: what does it mean to restore the atmosphere? Both how we might do that physically and literally, but also what sort of narrative and values do we need to accomplish a goal like that? And that's, again, I keep coming back to this theme of hope, and that's the theme that underpins everything that I'm talking about. So ask me that in a year. Ask me that question in July.
Okay. Look to 2025 for me.
Yeah, speaking to your point about bravery, and Hideo also brought up the concept of bold science. I don't know what I will see, but I would really like to see us be a little braver and more bold, both in the ways we reach in science and the ways we reach in art. And as institutions, I think that we need to be a little bit bolder and start divesting from fossil fuels when we can. So I'm hoping that kind of change starts to shift in 2025 with institutions all around the world.
Yeah, I think what was really wonderful, is we've been able to spend this year kind of figuring out the question to ask. And I feel like, and I would like to, is also like how maybe 2025 is figuring out how to implement and how to actually do something, right? And what are the next steps in this project, right? Like how do we implement or devise or use this collaboration in which we can develop new steps to then take forward and actually take action?
Great. I think you've all presented a fantastic model for how this collaboration and a creation of community can actually inspire people to make small steps, which are obviously necessary for making any kind of large-scale change. So feeling a commitment and a connection to others, making something is the first step. So I applaud you all and thank you for the work that you've done.
Thanks.
So we do have time for some questions, and we've got a microphone in the back if anybody would like to raise your hand or shout it out. Yes, please.
Make sure you speak into the microphone. Hold on one sec.
Yes, Hugh, right in the front, please.
We're going to get a mic in a second.
Yeah,
Yeah, there we go.
It was wonderful to hear you talk about action and how positive this collaboration is at sort of reaching hearts and minds both. And I'm wondering, how you envision the work you've done being able to move to an action plan. The early slides talking about, the countries and their extraction of whale. I was amazed to see Norway kind of zooming to the top now. And I look at that and say, my God, you're doing something that has both science and art, head, emotion. Is there a way to use Stanford and Woods Institute prestige to sort of take your show and take your findings to reach people and help them understand their impacts? And could you expand the benefit of your work with an action plan?
Yeah, that's, thank you for catching that. That's what we hope to do. And I'm glad you asked about, the whaling and the fishery. We actually just wrote a perspective paper, which is a little bit different. It has a little bit of a wider audience, and can, to Rob's point, make a point a little bit. But we don't whale anymore in the Southern Ocean. We mostly have transitioned into krill fishing, which is also what that diagram was showing. That was actually from this most recent paper. And I was telling some folks as we were mingling and people were having lunch that the krill fishery in the Southern Ocean almost exclusively doesn't contribute to global food security. Largely, it's used for fish meal for a large farmed fish, or you can go to Costco and buy krill oil supplements, which was very disturbing to Mark and I, and was a line that we explored for a while. But it's because people like the concept that Antarctic krill is more pristine, when in reality we know that it's not. It's all, spoiler alert, it's one ocean. But the point is, to your point, right, about action, I think that one of the ways that some of my collaborators are going to try and move this forward is we have international meetings about how we can govern the krill fishery in the Southern Ocean and who gets to do that. And I think that there are people who are much braver than I am who go into these meetings and say, we just need to stop fishing krill. We don't need to do it. At this point, the current whale population and humans are fishing the same catch. There's some really disturbing photos of boats fishing at the same time as whales are trying to feed. And if we're thinking ahead to a recovered whale population, there's not enough krill in the Southern Ocean to support both. So we're gonna have to pick. And I kind of think that normal fish oil supplements are probably fine.
Anybody else?
Hi, thank you guys so much. It's really great to see your collaboration come to fruition today. I was just going to ask about the materials in the columns, because I heard some of us asking questions about that. Is it seawater? Is it oil? How is the iron in there? What are the materials?
Yeah, so in going through, it's iron and seawater, the short answer. But we explored a variety of different, in kind of building, excuse me, and kind of building like models and prototypes and kind of iterating through all these different I feel like it's like the design language of it all. But basically kind of playing and creating models. We explored a variety of different things. Like, oh, we want the iron to do the thing. And then I think I skewed somewhere off topic and I was like, oh, but I don't want the things to rust. And so I was like, okay, well, to do that, we have to have an inhibitor, and that means oil-based things. And then we were talking about the conceptualness of oil-based things, and then talking about krill oil and going all over the place. And then we're like, oh, but really, the poetic gesture and what really was most exciting was that they do change, right? They do rust, and that they change more when you touch them and you do stuff with them. And thinking about that in terms of the larger world, right? The more we touch it, the more it changes. And so, or the faster it changes. And so I think there's oh, that's the thing. We had all these other things, and it was like, actually, you know what? You can just set that aside and come over here and be like, this is the thing I'd like to, and having the multiple of the same thing, right? So that we can then, see over change. And I feel like, that's a science thing, right?
We like literally went to Hopkins and took water and put it in jars that are still like in our lab. Sorry, I'll deal with that at some point. But we just like watched what would grow for a month or two. We like shaved some rust off of things too. And we were like, okay, what if we put iron in? Will things grow? What will happen?
Yeah.
So we don't know what's gonna happen either. We'll see it as you do.
Yeah. I think it's bringing that like element of chance and change. I think that's larger presence in the world, but we can set up systems like the photography, right? Like where we're able to kind of set up a parameters and systems, see what happens. Sometimes it fails, sometimes it doesn't. And when you figure out what fails, then you can take steps to change and make something that works the way we wanted it to. So.
Right here. We have 2 more questions. One in the back first.
Hi. First, thank you to both you, Mark, and you, Mehr. I'm really curious with y'all's sort of ethic against the doom and gloom. For the past 5 years, I've been working a lot in like these world building sessions or these sort of like co-created like foresight situations, and I've found when there is a clearly aspirational like tenor to the event, that there is often also this attendant like spiritual bypassing where it's like we're just going to look past many of the very difficult things, and so knowing sort of the rigor and discipline that you spend looking at a lot of difficult things. I'm really curious for both of you, what is that sort of more robust version of hope with the pragmatism and reality that you brought to this?
Yeah, I think for me, I say this a lot, but I think that science is a lot about knowing about something, but knowing something is different. And I think that doom and gloom has a place, right? Like you need to be able to feel it. You need to be able to feel, I think that's what causes action, but you also need to feel motivated, right? Like for action to happen, you need both not to just know about things happening, you need to feel them personally, but you also need to feel like you can do something about it. And I think that was, to your point about like not creating monuments of doom and gloom, right? Like you need to be able to feel that things are changing and understand that and have that be a felt experience, but also feel like you can do something about it or we're not going to.
I think also like, for me, it's also about, again, like you're saying, like it's about understanding, right? It's also about, it's not just knowing the process and the things that are happening, but also who they're happening to, the experiences that are embedded, the histories that are embedded within these spaces, and how those play in our connection to those places, and how like understanding the stories of humanity within those spaces helps us build a connection to then want to hopefully stay connected and preserve those things and be able to take action to work with those within the space to create something that is beneficial to both community but also to planet.
Yeah, we talked about like restorative justice too, and the concept of restorative justice is in order to like create restoration or reparation, you also need to acknowledge that harm was done. And so like I really appreciate what you're talking about. I think it's very easy to greenwash where we've been in service of we can fix it. But it is really important, right, to acknowledge, okay, there was harm done to a system like this or globally, we did it. But also that means that it's our responsibility to do something about it, and hopefully we can inspire that a little bit.
I know that this is also a central area of your research, Rob. Are you willing to talk to this too? How do you maintain hope and recognition of damage in the past?
Not to be trite, I feel that hope is almost a muscle that you have to consciously exercise. You have to seek inspiration, seek solutions, seek a vision that that you and other people working collectively can help change the world. So, in climate, there are many climate and environmental scientists in this room. It is hard. You wake up and students struggle with it. The climate grief it's a real phenomenon. It is hard to get up some days. At this point in my life, I feel like the years of climate action have rolled by in front of me like floats in a parade. like year after year after year, the parade just sort of rolls by you slowly. And then I've seen a lot of floats at this point in my life. So it's hard to stay optimistic about it, but we just have to fight and know that every tenth of a degree matters. Every single thing we do matters somewhere and to someone in the world. So find a community and make that change happen.
I think there was another question in the front of the room.
I was just wondering, I find your work very.
I think it's for the recording.
Yeah, people
Okay, I find your work very inspiring, and I'm just curious, are you seeing other artists, your contemporaries or other artists, not necessarily with a science background, but just in general, approaching these issues and inspired to create things that will bring about change and thoughtful discussions?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I see a lot of my contemporaries. We all come at it at different angles, right? Some of it might be environmental, like physically of the environment. Some may be, thinking about environmental justice, thinking about how, that relationship, like notions, even actually with one of the visiting artists here, Lamar, right, Lamar? We were talking about, I was telling him kind of like about this project, but he was talking about how like certain aspects of that like resonated with him in relationship to his project, which is not about climate at all, but it's about, but there's an aspect of that relationship to place and connection to place, and how wanting to honor and create something special in this place for communities was really exciting. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in this way that is very much like climate science and art, but it can be in these different aspects, whether it's, like you're saying, environmental justice for different communities, or working, just connecting people to their space and to their surroundings, right? And how and understanding how those people do connect to those spaces, I think really, makes people care. You want people to care. And so, yeah.
Maybe we have time for one more question, if anybody else. I see a hand over here, and there's a microphone coming to you.
Hi. Well, thank you for your work and your words. Let's see, I work with Indigenous communities in the Amazon, and I co-create exhibitions that represent their worldviews, and I present them in different, mostly university contexts in this country. One of the things I think about a lot is Indigenous science, and I think a lot about the fact that in most Indigenous languages, there is not a word for art. So I feel like those are very important things to do when we think about so-called the intersections of art and science. And I just wondered what you might have to say about that, if anything.
I mean, I believe, that it's very important to, like, Indigenous science is it feeds practice, but I'm not entirely sure what your question is. You're asking about my feelings about including Indigenous science into art, or?
Well, only if it makes sense to your practice, right?
I mean, I think about it. It informs part of my practice because I'm thinking about a variety of different ways of thinking about the world, right? Because nature is in and of itself, right, is a constructed term, right, and has shaped, like I've talked before, has really shaped the way we approached, particularly I'm going to say the Western landscape, right, and manifest destiny, and art's role in perpetuating that vision of nature. And so I think in re-examining that thing, I'm thinking about indigenous ways of thinking, but I'm also thinking about ways, a variety of different cultures, right? Like I'm half Japanese, so I'm also thinking about bringing in the Japanese American perspective and like my family's interactions with the landscape. And so I'm interested in kind of pulling all of those different views together to kind of inform my practice. And again, it's like it's still a learning experience, right? As I learn new ways of thinking, learn new ways of how other people are thinking, I bring it into my practice to create work.
I would also say, I think that, first of all, thank you for that work. It's really important work, and it's a great question, too, and something that is really important, I think, for scientists to think about, and I try and think about, too, what are alternative ways of knowing? And I also, recently was brought onto a really cool project that blends Chumash ways of knowing about the coast with the newly designated marine sanctuary down in Slough. And I also work with Chumash artists to create whatever artistic vision they want to see in their new sanctuary environment. And I think one of the coolest things that's come out of that is that for a lot of these folks, art is the way of knowing, right? Art is the science in a way. And so a lot of the projects that are coming up are not art in the way that we normally see them, but are like, what is another method? What's another way to do this? Maybe we build this native canoe and it helps us get to this other place. And we can use it for both of these things. And I think it's a very natural bridge and is really exciting to get to know about. And I think, to your point, we can integrate a lot more in terms of what do we know, and also, is art really that separate?
Yeah, I think actually something that's really, another project actually that I've been also following is the Klamath River Restoration Project, which has been a really fascinating project. And I know some of you have worked on that. And so for me, watching how that has come about and how like the working with the tribes, working with folks who are in the community that are invested in the restoration of that ecosystem has been just amazing, and I've been kind of curious to learn more about it as I am. But yeah.
I think maybe it's appropriate to end with a question then. We are curious to learn more, and so we're going to turn it back over to Chris for closing comments, I believe.
Thank you again, and please join me in thanking Kim and Mark, Mehr, Rob, and Hideo. Thanks to all of you for helping us launch the inaugural Visiting Artist Program in the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. Thanks to all of you for helping us celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment. And thank you for helping us make art a central feature of everything we do here. If you are going to join us at the Science Symposium, it starts at 1:30 in Gunn Hall, which is at 366 Galvez Street. Heads up, there are 2 gun halls on the Stanford campus, and don't go to the one on Knight Avenue. So thanks, everybody, and it's been a pleasure having you here and a pleasure to learn and bring art into our environment.